So encapsulation basically, kind of what the term means is you're almost think of a capsule. You're protecting your class. So if you have and a lot of this stuff you don't really understand until you have multiple different classes, and if you have multiple different developers working together, it's hard to understand this in the very beginning, but I'm going to help you try to understand it. So what do we have? We have public and private, and there's also protected, but we're just going to go over these two main guys here. So public means that if I have another class, let's just go with that data access object class that reaches out to the database. So these are my two keywords that I want to talk about. So public versus private. So public basically means if you create a student class and you have public, if you have public variables, let's say string, I don't have enough room in here, but let's just say for just pseudocode. Okay, so public, let's just say we have a name for the student. So if that's public, that means in this class and in any other class, let's say, because any other class in this package can access that name and modify it. So if I had a developer, if I was a developer and I was writing code for the data access object, I could refer to that variable. I would just use the object and then say name. This is pseudocode. And I could change it to whatever I want. I can modify that. I can throw just any random thing. I have the power to modify the variables that are public. I have the power to access any of the methods from different classes if it's public. Now, why don't you want to do that? Now, when you're getting to OOP and good practices and good design, you want to make your variables private. Why do you want to do this? Because let's say I have an age for this student. So if I have a variable age for this student and it's public, here's a good example. If it's public, so basically if I'm a developer and this is a silly example, but it helps you understand it. If I was a developer and I said, hey, that is a public variable, I can modify it. I'm going to set this student's age to -1. That doesn't make sense. Nobody can have an age of -1. And it also, a lot of times you can accidentally change the values of something and not mean to. You can set it to things. The big thing would be setting. If you set this to public, you don't have control of what people are doing with your member variables and your methods. If you set these to private, remember this guy, if this is public, all these other classes and developers can take your member variables and they can change it to anything they want. We don't want that. You might want to have restrictions like for age. We would want this to be private. I'm going to have some room down here. So we would want all of our, this is good practice, encapsulation is what we're talking about. Encapsulation. So we want to encapsulate our classes. We want to protect our variables, and a lot of the times it's mainly, the main focus is that you're going to see is mainly to protect your variables. You want to encapsulate it. And you might also want to, a lot of times you might want to protect your constructors or certain methods that you only want to use within this class. And we don't need to dive into that. Let's just go over this. Okay, so encapsulating, turning all of our variables to private. And then what we were going to have is you're going to hear the term called getters and setters. So if somebody wants to get the age, we set it private, so they can't just refer to that age. They can't say, like if we created that student1 object, or that S1, we can't say S1 dot age and assign it whatever we want, or we can't use this to grab the value. We can't do that when it's private. You don't have access to it. But obviously, we do want you to have some kind of access to get the age and get the name. So that's what like I said, we have getters and setters. Those are methods. Obviously, getters are to get the value. Setters are to set the value. A lot of times you might not always have setters. If you don't want people changing the data at all, you just want to give them access to get the data, you would just have getters. But a lot of times you're going to have getters and setters. Your setters can restrict what other developers or what people are changing this age to. You can have restrictions. So if I had a setter method, I would call it set age. I would pass in an int in. So this is my setter method that I would code up. Inside the body, I would probably say if n equals to, if they try to pass in some crazy value like -1 or 0, I'd say if n is less than or equal to 0, because you can't have somebody that has an age of 0 or below, then you would want to give some kind of error message. Same thing if they're over, like maybe you want to have a max age, like 100 years old or something like that, you might want to catch for that as well. But you have restrictions. That way when somebody tries to access your data, they got to use your getters and setters, which have your restrictions, saying, hey, if you want to change the age variable, you can't just access the age variable directly. You have to go through my setter, which is set age. So this person who's doing some manipulation in this class or wanting to change the age for a student object, they would have to use .setAge and pass in a value, and I would have some checking or some restrictions. And if they don't follow my rules, then I'm going to give them an error message. So that is encapsulation.